On the 6th of June, 2009, a Brazilian Navy crew pulled a piece of an airliner out of the Atlantic. It was the tail fin of an Airbus A330. 5 days earlier, that aircraft had been cruising at 35,000 feet with 228 people on board. Then it stopped answering. No mayday. No distress call. Nothing. And the flight recorders, the only witnesses that could explain what happened, were sitting nearly 4 kilometers below the surface, somewhere in an area the size of a small country. It would take 2 years to find them. Air France Flight 447 left Rio de Janeiro on the evening of the 31st of May, bound for Paris. The aircraft was 3 years old. The crew were experienced. The route was ordinary. About 4 hours in, the flight entered the Intertropical Convergence Zone, a belt of storms that circles the equator. Every aircraft crossing the Atlantic here deals with it. The captain went to the crew rest area, leaving the 2 co-pilots at the controls. That was routine as well. At 2:10 in the morning, something small happened. The pitot tubes froze. These are small forward-facing probes on the nose of the aircraft. They measure air pressure, and from that pressure, the computers calculate airspeed. Inside the storm, ice crystals blocked them. For less than a minute, the aircraft did not know how fast it was going. The autopilot did what it is designed to do when the data stops making sense. It handed control back to the pilots. And here is the part that investigators would spend years trying to understand. The aircraft was fine. Both engines were running. Nothing was broken. All the crew had to do was hold the attitude and wait for the ice to clear. Instead, the pilot flying pulled back on the stick. The A330 began to climb. It went from 35,000 feet to almost 38,000. And at that altitude, in thin air, climbing that steeply, an airliner runs out of lift. The stall warning sounded. It would sound more than 70 times over the next 4 minutes. The aircraft stopped flying and started falling, belly first, still nose up, sinking at more than 10,000 feet per minute. Now the confusion compounds. Because the pilot flying kept pulling back. To recover from a stall, you must push the nose down and trade altitude for speed. He did the opposite, and there is a reason that is not simply incompetence. The nose was high. The aircraft was falling almost flat. Out the window there was only black ocean and cloud. And crucially, the 2 men were not saying what they were doing. The other pilot did not know the stick was being held back. Neither did the captain, when he returned to the cockpit about 90 seconds into the fall. He stood behind them in the dark, trying to read a situation that made no sense, with warnings going off and instruments disagreeing. By the time anyone said the word stall out loud, the aircraft was below 10,000 feet. There was not enough altitude left. Flight 447 fell for 3 minutes and 30 seconds. It struck the water intact, belly first. Everyone on board died on impact. The search that followed became one of the most difficult recovery operations in aviation history. Ships, submarines, and eventually autonomous underwater vehicles mapped the seafloor. In May 2011, almost 2 years later, the recorders were found at 3,900 meters, and they still worked. What they revealed changed the industry. The pitot tubes on that model were known to be vulnerable to ice, and were already being replaced across the fleet. That replacement was accelerated. But the deeper finding was about training. Pilots had been taught to recover from a stall approach, not from a fully developed stall at altitude, because on a modern airliner it was considered almost impossible. Flight 447 proved it was not. High-altitude stall recovery is now mandatory training worldwide. Angle of attack is taught differently. So is what to do when the automation gives up and hands you an aircraft you have not hand-flown in hours. 228 people did not come home. The pilots were not reckless, and the aircraft was not broken. What failed was the space between a machine that expected to be understood, and 3 people trying to understand it in the dark, with less than 4 minutes to get it right.